All right, this area that you're seeing now presently is the area in which the saucer I talked about earlier, December 13th of 52, came in and hovered slightly below the trees. And you'll see that the photograph that I will provide as well from that original event shows that the trees are above the saucer a little bit, just a touch. So it shows you between ground and mid-tree, you're probably at least 75, 80, 90 feet. So that craft was about 20 feet below those trees and above the ground. And you can see these trees have filled out a little bit, obviously, in 70 years, 75 years since that event occurred. And if you follow me a little bit between the trees, up this little pathway road, there's a field at the very far end. And that was less cleared of vegetation. And that's where the second saucer came that I described, that Alan Tolman and all those dozens of witnesses came over the top of it, head, over the trees and sat down in that field. And they all went running up the field, up towards the street and up the field and said, "My God, look at that, look at that." And Alan turned around here to George and shouted, "Look at that, can you believe that?" And George just smiled and waved and said, "Oh yeah, the boys stop by every so often."
Super. Hey Glenn, here we are back in Palomar Gardens after 11 years?
Yes, sir.
And you've got a new book to tell us all about.
Yes, I do. Well, first of all, thanks for coming and partaking of the activity here and in the campgrounds. And we met a lot of people and new people, and there continues to be increased activity and interest in George Adamski and the work we have been doing for the last 60 years, and that's always very gratifying. Also, for those who are watching, please excuse my appearance. We have been camping for 3 days, and so I'm still in my outdoor grubbies that I did not bring along, expecting to spend so much time in front of the camera. But having that being said, yes, my new book is out, The UFO Reality, Can Truth Prevail? It is available through the internet publisher Blurb, BLURB.com. And they take the orders, they print the books to orders, and then they ship it to you. I am not in that loop. So if you're interested, you can go on there in their search engine and type in the first part of the chapter. It's titled The UFO Reality, and it'll take you to the page. There's two selections. One is for paperback and one is for hardcover.
Now, this new book, Glenn, it's basically a history of your family's connection with both George Adamski and extraterrestrial visitors to this planet.
It's a two-section book. Yes, my family has had a long history in this field, and for whatever reason, the UFO community has chosen to ostracize George Adamski and anybody connected with him, and so I felt that it was more than ready to bring a factual, documented section in there that shows all the work that my father and mother, and later myself after my father passed away, have done in this field. It discusses the history starting around 1963, some are a little bit earlier than that, of how we met George and how we became his friends and personal co-workers, and then later inherited the program from him and his fellow student Alice Wells, who had many of the rights as well. And it talks about our visit and our invitation to NASA, the Pentagon, the British House of Lords, and dozens of other events. And I thought that if people had a chance to read that, they could see that there is a faction of this UFO segue that has taken this subject very real and very rationally and logically, and was accepted into avenues of government and other places to discuss this in the same way. These avenues of government and military and what have you do not have any credence in how the UFO subject has evolved over time. They're not creature feature movie horror people. They deal with science and fact and actual contact. And we have striven to do the same thing. And that's why we found such a convenient and cohesive reception everywhere we went around the planet, whether that was national television in Japan in 1977, many UFO conferences and television events throughout Europe and Australia. So I am pleased to pass along this documented exposure so people can see for themselves that there are places of substantial substance that can help to wash away some of the confusion that is self-generated in the current UFO segment or program.
Now, the main thing to take away is that these extraterrestrial visitors, they're human. They're not monsters.
That's correct. There's no
three heads.
Nowhere have we gone, whether it was with scientists or anywhere, official or anywhere else, do they concur with the stories and the fantasies and the science fiction that is being promoted in the field of recent years. They are adamantly convinced and have proof that we have human extraterrestrial, highly intelligent civilizations and people visiting us. Biologically, it is not possible to have reptilians or crayfish or any of the hocus pocus monsters that we hear about. There are no Sasquatches flying and building flying saucers. These are all beyond not only the mental, but the physical capabilities of these type of species. It's not to say that these species are dumb, but they are all relegated within the phylums and their own particular genera. And they don't crawl out of the ocean or out of the jungle and start building supercomputers or 747s or anything like that. And so I think we have to take a moment to learn and to recognize that that we are the uppermost intelligent manifestation of creation, and that it is us after thousands of years. The technology and the ability to travel space requires technology that is still thousands of years beyond our capability, let alone an animal that would crawl out of the jungle.
And I was going to mention as well that the people that you have in the UFO arena at the moment are making a fair amount of money out of publishing certain aspects that are completely illogical within this field.
Yes, what's happened is, like so many other fields, you have a large segment of exploiters and self-promoters that are looking for either accolades or media exposure and profitability. They're looking to make as much money as possible, and have found that it is easy to do so if you release yourself to what we would call certain negative influences. And this is not what this program, and this is not what extraterrestrial visitations and the interactions with them is for, or ever has been for. It has been for everyone, everywhere, free and available, and so we can increase the capabilities of our civilization and of our human experience so that we too can reach the point where we join them in space and in other worlds and throughout the cosmos, because that is our natural heritage. And so we need to turn the corner on this and go the direction that will be of benefit to us rather than constantly mill around with Halloween stories.
The other aspect as well, which I think is fascinating, is that we're sitting in a spot where a saucer came down, literally just behind us here, and there were lots of witnesses.
What happened is if you follow some of the history of George Adamski, his original contact in the Desert Center, which is out here about an hour from this location of Mount Palomar, on November 20th, 1952, which was well documented and also provided with photographic evidence, reported in the newspaper. So here on the property, if you look around us, and you'll get John will provide you with some pictures as well in the current state, and then we'll provide the picture as it was 60 or nearly 70 years ago of the saucer hovering below tree level about 15 to 20 feet above the ground. And there were multiple witnesses on the property and visitors on the property who witnessed it as well. So the saucer came down, hovered right between the trees, and the package dropped out of the bottom. And that package contained the photographic plate that George had given the visitor out in the desert 3 weeks earlier. And upon that plate were a series of engravings.
We had this problem last time, do you recall, with the birds twittering away and singing. And then somebody had a tractor, if you remember. Yeah.
I'll go back there.
Yeah.
So on December 13th of 1952, this saucer came over the property here at Mount Palomar where George and his students resided, and they had a small cafe to provide services to the astronomical personnel that would travel up and down the mountain, because the Hale 200-inch observatory sits on the mountain up above this location. Saucer hovered, a small hatch opened and dropped out the package, and in the package, after it was unwrapped, was the glass plate that George had given the visitor 3 weeks earlier, and on it was a series of engravings. And these engravings hold the key to building or accessing electromagnetic energy, basically a map for a motor to build, and thereby give us the jump into free energy, which would solve a great deal of the world's problems. And the interesting caveat to that is 10 years later, a professor of anthropology by the name of Marcel Homé, very well known in Europe, did a lot of exploration in Brazil, in the Brazilian jungle, and he looked for megalithic remains of cities. He came across an area called the Piedra Pintada, which had engravings that were at least 10 to 30,000 years old, and found an area that had almost 80 to 90% exactly the same engraving that was on the photographic plate, and we'll provide that shot with the comparison of the two as well. And so it shows that we have had access to this information through various civilizations, either their rise or their decline, which many of them have all done that, for a long time. So technology, superior technology, has been available to us for quite a long time. And another event that happened in 1957, 58 time, I believe it was right there at the end of 57 to 58, an aerospace engineer by the name of Alan Tolman, who we have also a section of film on. I believe it's on YouTube as well, or we'll make it available. He was in this property with his wife, and he had seen UFOs over Korea during the war, many different places. And so when he saw George's article, he had to come and meet him here. And during one of those meetings, along with 24 or more witnesses, they saw a saucer come over the top, past the area where the other one dropped the package, and move up the property to the field that's up at the other end, where it soft landed and touched down. And all the people ran up the road there to get a closer look, in which they did. And then after a minute or so, it slowly hovered up and then moved up into space, leaving the telltale ring of circular motion onto the grass that is on that is on the field. And that has to do with the rings that are under the rotating gyroscopic rings underneath the flange of the saucer that counter rotate and is part of the pro-gravity. There's no such thing as anti-gravity. You nullify gravity by working with it, not against it. And that's the system that they use. So
they must have been absolutely astounded, the people in the cafe who came
absolutely. I mean, talk about actual encounter, actual vindication of what George talked about. And on this property, already starting, since he moved here in 1945, already starting in the late 40s, these saucers appeared in this area. John will provide you with some pictures that were released in recent times in the European media, not here in the U.S. You haven't seen a peep of that.
I wonder why.
But in 1949, during October, from around the 9th or 10th, for a period of 1 week, the staff of the Mount Palomar telescope took multiple pictures of UFOs in action above the mountain around the telescope. And when you see these photos, you have to just shake your head and wonder. And these photos were submitted to Project Blue Book as well, along with the report of that activity, including the report by George Adamski lower here in the mountain of seeing a large cigar-shaped mothership or carrier craft, as it's called, as well. So by no means was this fairy tale.
Well, good luck with the book, Glenn, and I'm sure there'll be lots of interest, because what we need now are facts, not fantasy.
Absolutely, and I hope to provide that and documentation as much as possible. The second half of the book is called Reality Check, and there are 11 or so chapters in there that deal with the appearance and photographs of mass sightings over Europe. People always say, well, how come they don't come in numbers, and how come they don't come to places that are recognizable? And if you do a little research, you find already in July of 52, they flew over Washington, D.C. and were photographed flying past the nation's capital. They were photographed and witnessed in the U.K., over London in 54, over Paris and France in November of 54. They flew in formation for 7 days over Rome and the Vatican. Thousands of people seeing it. Unbelievable amount of photographic evidence. In Madrid, in South Africa, in India, in Russia, in Japan, everywhere. And we categorize that and provide the pictures of it. The one thing I am very proud of in this book as well is that we have embedded photographic evidence into the pages below the areas that discuss that. So you get the subject taken one step further to give you an opportunity to really see how things were. And we talk about the moon and its reality, and the misnomer of disclosure, and questioning the alien abduction scenario, and whether there's aliens to do with it at all, which I highly suspect they do not. So it is thoroughly comprehensible and about 330 pages, along with a massive reference section of about 10 pages as well. You will find dozens and dozens of references that you can go and see the sources of what we talk about. So I think it's not only a historical revealing of our history, it deals with the current situation, and then provides the academic references as well.
And what may surprise people is that those sources that were photographed flying over the White House and Capitol building, amazingly, they weren't Nazis flying those sources.
Well, that misconception is dealt with in the book as well, because there's a contingent of this particular field that likes to sling out unverifiable innuendo in the effort to gain personal attention and explanations where they have no answers. That's the sad thing about this. It's so much theorizing and opinionated and supposition by those who have no answers of any tangible nature or any experience, personal experience. And so when you look at the accusations of the so-called Aryan or Nazi origins of these spacecraft, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to quickly research and find that these crafts have been photographed in Europe as back to at least 1918. And of course, there were no Nazis then. We still had World War I going on, and the National Socialists didn't come into power until 1933. The laboratories of the V-2 rocket and other technologies of the Nazis in 1939 in Peenemünde. And so what happened was the Germans noticed these craft as well. So did they all over the planet. But the Germans thought, well, maybe they had the intellectual, scientific expertise to duplicate what they could. So what do you do first? You duplicate the shape, and then you try to duplicate the propulsion system. So you see some of the Nazi configurations looking a little similar, maybe about 50-60% similar to the actual UFO. But then the similarity stops. There's a gun turret in the bottom. It doesn't have magnetic rings. It doesn't have the electromagnetic propulsion system. It has a series of propeller blades or helicopter blades on the bottom. And the craft was seriously underpowered, unstable. The tests that were conducted, it flew for a few hundred yards and then crashed. And then remember that the real saucers were tracked by radar up to 20,000 miles per hour through the atmosphere. Nothing we have technologically can deal with that even to today. And then the second part that they have totally ignored is these craft fly up to a large carrier craft that is in orbit and comes seldomly into the atmosphere, but does and has been photographed. But these craft are anywhere from 1,000 to a mile, 5 miles, 10 miles big. If the Germans could have produced a 10-mile long spacecraft that could fly from planet to planet and saucers that could zip around, the whole outcome of World War II would have been totally different, and
Totally.
we'd be all speaking German and goose-stepping today.
We certainly would. So the thing to remember is that there's much talk of disclosure at the moment in congressional hearings, and we have to remember really that original disclosure was Adamski disclosure in 1952.
Yes.
And that was sat upon by the military-industrial complex.
Well, George was not the only so-called contactee. There were some legitimate contacts, the two twin sisters in Norway, the woman in South Africa, the priest in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, the priest in Papua New Guinea with his students who witnessed the saucers floating with the people standing on the flange of it making some repairs, and they waved back and forth to each other. And so, but that was, George worked tenaciously at that disclosure. He took dozens of photographs and made them available to anybody who came to this property. He handed out for free.
They weren't being charged for.
They were not being charged for. George very seldom made anything from this particular program. If you look at the contracts for his books, the overseas, all the dozens and dozens of contracts in foreign nations had zero royalties, nothing. When he lectured across the world on his 2 world tours, it was law that you cannot come in as a foreigner into the country and give presentations and charge for that. So he didn't make a dime from this. And I have seen accusations on the internet, well, George got rich and it had notoriety from this. And I said, when he passed away, the official clerk record that is required by law to reveal estate, George had 2 suits and maybe $2,000 in the bank account. He had no car, no property, no nothing. So anybody who makes that accusation that he pocketed money is either totally ignorant or a liar.
Well, I think this book is going to open a few eyes, and I hope that people go out and buy it, because it's a brilliant read and comes highly recommended.
Thank you, John.